It is good to see you all. Welcome. If we haven't met, we'd love to meet you. My name is Brad Sarian. I am one of the pastors with Restored LA. Yeah. And I know it's going to be sad for the Padres when you guys lose, but we still love you. We still love you. It's probably not a good way to start off a sermon. I know. It's okay. You'll be fine. I'm going to talk about our feelings in a little bit. It is a joy to be back here. Last year, God did. He met me in a really powerful way. I've had several of you ask me, are you going to just cry your entire sermon? And, I'm not planning on it at all. And so this will be a little bit of a different talk, a little bit of a different sermon, if you will. It's going to be a little bit more of a teaching, more of an equipping, as we are going to have kind of three main talks today. We are going to be looking at the world, the flesh, and the devil. And really looking at those three things from the lens of, Jesus, how can we follow you more faithfully? How can we become greater disciples in your kingdom? Where can we experience more intimacy with you? We want that as disciples of Jesus. And ultimately, we have three big enemies that get in the way of that. It's the world, the flesh, and the devil. And so today I'm going to be talking about the world. But before we do that, I'm going to jump in and pray. Is my phone there for my timer by chance? No, it's gone. Sweet, thank you. Let me pray. And then we'll get rolling. Jesus, thank you for your grace. Thank you for your kindness. Thank you for some time to come and be here with you, with one another, to get a break from the busyness, from the noise, to make ourselves available to you, trusting in your promise that as we draw near to you, you draw near to us. Would you help us this morning as we talk about these enemies of ours that are real, that are even difficult to see and feel sometimes, and yet get in the way of our intimacy and our obedience to you? Would you show us? Would you open our hearts? Would you challenge us, convict us, encourage us? We need you. We love you. It's in your beautiful name. Amen. I grew up in a Lutheran church. My wife grew up in a Lutheran church as well. Her Lutheran church was very alive and active, and Jesus' presence was felt there. The Lutheran church I grew up in was pretty much dead. It was a very traditional, just kind of go through the motions type vibe. And we had a very small youth group. So I was never a part of a traditional youth group, if you will, until high school years. And it was a high school that I went to a mega church and started hanging out with friends that were all part of this bigger church, and they would go on retreats often. And I was kind of connected to a bunch of different friends at different churches, and so I went on 3 different retreats in my 10th to 11th grade year. And all of the retreats, they looked just like this. We were in rooms like this, cabins, woods, all this kind of stuff. And all 3 retreats, my first 3 years at retreats, were centered on the verses of Romans 12, 1-2. They are beautiful, beautiful verses. They are very, very important verses. But I honestly thought kind of in my early years, that's just what you do at a retreat. You preach Romans 12. There's 2 verses in the whole Bible. Every Christian needs to be reminded every year at a retreat, hey guys, remember these verses. So in tradition of that, I'm going to open up to Romans 12. And just read these very powerful verses. These verses can be twisted a little bit if you miss Romans 1-11. You need to know that, because ultimately Romans 1-11, Paul's unpacking the good news of Jesus, what Christ has accomplished, our justification, our sanctification, our union with Christ, our adoption and glorification. He's unpacking these beautiful, beautiful realities to the church at Rome. And then in chapter 12, verse 1, he says this: "Therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercies," right? Chapters 1-11, "I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age. The ESV says the world. But be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is the good, pleasing, and perfect will of God. Okay, so Romans 12, we would be at a retreat and they would talk about that. And each retreat took like a different lens. One was about worship and we did that whole thing. And then another was about transforming your mind, reading scripture and that kind of thing. But out of those retreats, I don't remember anyone specifically camping out on that term, this age or this world. Because what's fascinating is Paul says, do not be conformed to this world. Do not be conformed to this age. But in order to not be conformed to the world, to not be conformed to the age, wouldn't it be important to know what the world and the age are? I was thinking about it last night when our lovely host was explaining to us about bears. Stay away from bears. Don't feed the bears. Hide your food. Hide your kids. Hide it all. Like, bears are scary, right? And for me, as I'm listening to that announcement made a ton of sense. I don't think anyone in the room was like, bears. That's silly. Because we know what bears are. We've seen National Geographic. We've read Bernstein Bears. Like we have an accurate view of bears being scary. They can kill you. Stay away. Now, what if you did not know what a bear was? Right? You had never heard of a bear. You had never seen a bear. You have zero concept of a bear. And she gets up last night. She's like, be careful of bears. Don't feed them. Stay away from bears. You'd be like, okay, cool. Like, good to know. And then you walk to your cabin, which some of you did last night, and you saw bears. Imagine you're like, oh, what is that? He looks so cute and fluffy. Oh, he's standing up. I think he wants to greet me. And you move toward the bear not knowing what it is. That would end very bad for you, right? Be careful of bears. We get that. We know what a bear is. Paul says, don't be conformed to the world. Many of us were like, okay. Like I don't know what the world is. I don't know what this current age is. So it's impossible for us not to be conformed to something if we're unaware of what it is. And so it's my desire today to do my best to kind of unpack this concept of the world to us. I've been deeply helped by a lot of different books. The primary one I'm going to be working through is the Bible, and then The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self by Carl Trueman. He's been incredibly helpful in the process of thinking about the world and how we can make sure that we do not conform to the world. But as you have your Bible, run over real quick to 1 John. I'm going to give you a passage in 1 John chapter 2 where John explains a little bit more about this world that we are experiencing. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. As you're going over there, the New Testament writers use the word world in a few main different ways. One is just talking about the world that we live in, the physical world, right? Romans 1, Paul talks about the invisible attributes of God have been made manifest. We see his power through the world he created. We look outside, we see the mountains, and we're like, whoa, there's a creator. So there's a world that's a physical sense. Then there's the world of people. John 3:16. For God so loved the world, like he loves us. He loved people, the people he created. And then there's a third type of the world that John talks about here in 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. He says this, do not love the world, which is weird, right? John 3:16, God loves the world. Don't love the world. It's like, okay, like double standard, but sure. Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride in one's possessions is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world, with its lust, is passing away, but the one who does the will of God remains forever. So John is picking up on this other concept of the world. I should have my books up here. Hold on. That was cool. John is picking up on this concept of the world that is different than the physical world. It's different than the world that God loves, the people. It's this system, it's this structure that's opposed to God. John Mark Comer, in his book, Live No Lies, defines this world very helpfully. I should have marked it, page 205. There we go. Like this. The world is the system of ideas, values, morals, practices, and social norms that are integrated into the mainstream and eventually institutionalized in a culture corrupted by the twin sins of rebellion against God and the redefinition of good and evil. So simply put, the world is the systems and structures that we operate in that are opposed to God. The world we live in is not pro-God. It's anti-God. It doesn't want God. That's always been the case since the fall. But fascinatingly enough, worldliness changes based on culture, based on time. America 2022, SoCal, California, whatever, worldliness looks different right now than worldliness looked 500 years ago in America. Worldliness today in America, 2022, looks different than it looks like in North Korea in 2022. The age and the world can be adapted to our specific cultures, and it's very, very important for us to know what the age is that we're living in. What is the air we breathe? There's a story of two young fish that are swimming in the ocean one day, and as they're swimming, an older fish comes by, and as the older fish passes by, older fish says, "How's the water, boys?" And the two younger fish just keep swimming by, and the younger fish turns to the other and goes, "What the heck is water?" And it's this idea of culture, that the air we breathe, the water we live in, that the world we're surrounded by, it feels so normal to us that it's actually difficult to see. It's difficult to understand what it's like because we were raised in it. It's the air we breathe. And so it's my desire today to kind of put some level of an X-ray vision on our world as best we can see it so that we don't conform to it, so that we can enjoy Jesus and become more like him. That's the ultimate desire. But in order to do that well, it's essential for us to understand what the primary and prevalent message of our world that most of us wrestle with today is. And by doing that, it's this term that I'm going to use a lot. So get ready. It's fancy. You sound really smart if you use it. Expressive individualism. Okay, I coined the term. I'm just kidding. Some sociologists, Robert Bella, and then Charles Taylor and Carl Truman, a bunch of sociologists and religion and historians talk about this phrase, expressive individualism, as the culture, the air that you and I breathe. But in order to understand expressive individualism well, I want to give a little bit of a contrast and help you see what traditional culture generally was like. I'm going to speak in general terms today. Don't I know a guy. It's okay. As best I can to go, hey, here are generalities to help us see the world we're living in. And as I've studied this over the last few months, it's been really, really helpful for me in seeing, whoa, there are so many areas I still need to submit to Jesus in that I've kind of just gone, this is normal, and it's not normal. So we're going to talk historic culture first, then we're going to talk about the current culture we're living in, and then we're going to talk about Jesus culture, okay? So I'm not going to, please hear me, I'm not trying to say, let's get back to the good old days. No such thing, right? Carl Truman says, he's a historian, he says there's no such thing as a nostalgic historian. All of history's dark and evil. Like you can't just look back and be like, oh man, you remember when things were, it was bad. It's always been bad, but it's helpful to see the traditional culture and then to understand our own culture. So here's what cultures generally do. They try to answer the big questions of life. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? What's my purpose? Where am I heading? What's the good life? Each culture has to wrestle with those questions and ultimately gives answers to those questions. Whether it's on a billboard or in a Disney movie, our world is constantly saying, here are the answers to who you are, where you came from, and the purpose of your life. Traditional culture says that the true self is discovered by looking out to the world and then conforming yourself to what you see around you. Traditional culture generally, back in the day, you could, depends on where and when. Some places it's still that reality here. You grow up and you begin to ask the question, who am I? Who am I? And the answer to that is your parents tell you. Your culture tells you. Your society tells you. Your church tells you. Your city tells you. Your neighbors tell you. This is who we are. So you look around and you go, okay, my family, my church, this is who I am. And then they say, now conform to become like that. You need to adapt yourself to these things. Conform your body, conform your mind, conform all of who you are to become like that in the world. Sociologist Philip Reif says that there's been kind of four main progressions of society. The first was the political man. This is the person who found their identity primarily in society, through the city and the politics. They said, who I am is what I do to serve my city best. Then there was the religious man who found their identity ultimately in their church, in their culture, in their religion, whatever that religion was. They looked around and they saw, okay, the priest is saying this, I need to conform to this. My church, my small group is saying this, I need to conform to this. Then it became the economic man, that ultimately it was through work, trying to make money to serve. That was, in best case scenario, still was outward focused. And then Philip Reif says, over the last 50 to 100 years, we've seen a new transition to a new type of person. It's the psychological person. This is that idea of the expressive individual. Those first three, they're different, but they all looked outside to figure out who they should be. The psychological person of what we've seen in our current culture, which is expressive individualism, does not look outside to define who it is, it looks inside. Expressive individualism says you discover your true self by looking in, and then you conform yourself to whatever you find deep down in your desires. That's the air you and I breathe. You be you. Follow your heart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Your truth is your truth. It's me looking inside and then going, this is what I feel internally. Now I must adapt my life to this reality. So let me give you some examples of what this looks like. Atomic Habits, been on the bestseller list for 4 years since it was written. Brilliant book, helpful. James Clear, not a Christian dude. He uses some Christian language though throughout his book. He ties identity to behavior brilliantly in the first couple of chapters. Devastatingly if you're not a Christian, but brilliantly, he understands, he says that your behavior flows from your identity. Bible, spot on, good job. Now here's the devastating part. He says, choose your identity. So he knows that who I am influences what I do. He's spot on there. But because we live in an expressive individualist culture, where we don't know who we are, we can't look to a religion, we can't look to the city-state, we can't look to anything outside us. James Clear goes, in order to figure out how to work better and become better at habits, choose your identity. And he says it just like in passing. I'm like, choose your identity. That's a big deal. Like anyone struggle with like who they are? Like, yeah, it's like, but I'll just choose real quick so I can work on some habits. It's like, am I a husband? Am I a pastor? Am I a dad? Am I a friend? Am I, like, what am I? Who am I? When I look inside, I find competing elements of who I am. Man, I want to be this. I also want to be this, and I want to be this. Just choose. Your habits aren't going to work unless you choose. And so this is the air we breathe. It's like choose your identity, and then your habits flow from it. So let me give some examples of kind of compare and contrast to these things. And as I do this, hopefully you'll begin to see a little bit more. And I hope you're not hearing like those people out there. Ultimately, this is to hopefully give us some diagnosis on our own hearts of where we're breathing in this air and we haven't even noticed it, right? Think about parenting. For those of you who are parents, or some of you just babysit, and you know that kids today are a little wild, right? Traditional culture generally said to children, here are the family rules, you become like us. You know, this is who we are as a family. You must conform to our image. Expressive individualism, the culture we breathe, says, hey, little buddy, you do whatever you want to do. I remember living in San Diego. We lived in Kensington. We'd go to the park every single day at 5 o'clock. Sarah and I, she would be at the park from like 8 to 5, and then I was at the park from like 5 to 8, and we'd put the kids to bed. That was just like life was at the park. And we got to know all of our neighbors. It was lovely. Kensington was a pretty progressive little, San Diego, yeah. But Kensington was like, here we go. And one of the moms we became friends with had her over for dinner. She had one kid, and she would always ask me questions about parenting. I think it was because our kids were a little bit more well-behaved. Her kid always bit everybody, but she would just ask hey, what are you guys doing for that, And I was like, we'd have all those talks. But I remember one day we're talking, and she knew I was a pastor. We'd share the gospel with her, all this stuff. And she goes, I have a question for you. And the kids were young at that point, like 1 and 2, 2 and 3, something like that. She says, are you going to raise your kids Christian? And I was like, I don't know if I've actually thought about the answer. Yes, yes, 100%. We're going to raise them Christian. She was like, oh, it just feels so oppressive. And I was like, yeah, no, I think it's for their good. Can you tell your son to stop killing my kid? And ultimately, she was like, the way I'm going to raise my kids is just let them discover what they want to do. That's expressive individualism. That's the air we breathe. It's just kind of like, hey, buddy, I'm not going to tell you what's right or wrong. You just do what's best for you, right? Think about medicine and science. I was reading a book this past week that talked about, back in the day, the doctors and the dentists were the professionals. Like to an error. I read a story where a dentist that put this guy under, and the guy woke up and all of his teeth were gone. He was like, well, what happened? He's like, oh, they needed to come out. They're like, no consent. No, it was just like, I'm the professional. They were diseased. They got to go. We'll figure it out. That's not the current culture we're living in. Thank God, obviously. But a few months ago, I drove by a billboard. It was an advertisement for a hospital. And it was a doctor sitting, in his thing, and then talking to a person. And the words on the billboard were, you're the expert, we're here to listen to you. Think about it, yeah. Someone's like, what's wrong with that? A lot. You didn't go to med school. Now I understand what they're trying to say. We're not going to take all your teeth out without asking you. We want to get to know you and hear your story. But I, as the patient, get to walk into the doctors and be like, doc, let me tell you what's going on. It's like, the doctor should be like, why am I here? You figure this out, right? This is, we know what's right. Gender. Big deal. Most of Carl Trueman's book is about gender because sexuality has played such a large role of this change that we've seen in culture. And one of the changes he points out is gender. If you were to go to your doctor 30 years ago and tell your doctor, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, the doctor would have said, we need to fix your mind and conform your mind to your body. Today, you go to the doctor and say, I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, and the doctor says, there's something wrong with your body. We need to conform your body to your mind. Significant change. Significant. It's, I look inside, I see woman, or whatever it is, and now I conform myself to the external thing that I discovered internally. That's not how it's been. Careers. Think about the way we approach careers. Carl Truman says if he were to ask his grandpa, did you find satisfaction in your work? He said, my grandpa would have looked at me and gone, I don't understand your question. Like, I was a farmer for 60 years. My dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer. What do you mean satisfaction? I put food on the table. Today, millennials, we rock at this. It's like, I'm quitting. It's been a hard 4 weeks at this job. I feel like I'm not expressing the trueness of my ability to change the world. I'm not satisfied in my output of how valuable of a human being I am. We look at our job, we look at our career as something that should save us, should satisfy us. We look inside, right? Authority. Past traditional cultures have actually seen older people as sages and wise, people that you go to for wisdom. Authority used to be like an okay thing. It was normal in culture that there were authority levels. Today, it's bad news everywhere. Authority is oppressive, it's power. We reject it because it doesn't match the me be me, you be you. So no, you don't tell me what to do. Sex used to be something you did. Now it's who you are. Truman points out, gay sex has always been a thing. Read history. But the term homosexual or I'm gay was not a thing until recently. It was just something people did. Now it's ultimately our identity. This is I'm a straight, I'm gay, I'm heterosexual, whatever it is. It's my identity because I look inside and I see these desires and now I have to express what I feel into the world around me. And last is marriage. Traditional cultures viewed marriage very differently than the way we currently view marriage. A few years ago, we were on vacation in Hawaii and we were sitting on a boat. We're doing like a snorkeling vibe thing. And yeah, it was good. And we're on a boat and there's like 50 people on the boat and we sit down and I sit next to this couple, Indian couple, and we start talking and they asked some questions. I asked like, hey, how long have you guys been married? They're like 15 years. And I was like, cool, how did you guys meet? And they looked at each other and like, And I was like, oh, okay, like shouldn't have gone. I was like, I don't like a dating website or like what? They're like, our parents arranged our marriage. And I was like, whoa. I mean, that for an American, that just seems, I've read about that, but I didn't know, like, whoa, like tell me about that, right? I wasn't that weird, but internally I was just like I want to know more about this. They seem stoked, hand over her. They seem like in love, and I'm like we met right before we got married. Our parents knew each other, and they just arranged it, and I was like, so like, did you guys like fall in love, or like how did that? It was like just a completely different concept of marriage than what many of us are looking for. Many of us have been taught like your spouse is going to save you. You get married so that you'll be happy. You have to find the mythical unicorn who's perfect in every way. And when you find this mythical unicorn who's perfect in every way, somehow they're going to look at you and go, I want you. Which is the most arrogant thing we could ever possibly fathom. But they're going to, my spouse exists for me. And this is why divorce rates are through the roof. And I'm not talking about cases of sexual immorality and abuse and those kinds of things. I'm talking about most influencers and celebrities who come out on their Instagram and say, spouse and I are parting ways. We've discovered that we can't be our true self with one another. We're still going to be besties. But it's just getting in the way of our joy and our happiness and self-fulfillment. In the comments are like, you're so amazing. I'm proud of you. You're brave and courageous. That's the world we live in. which is foreign to a traditional culture, that saw marriage ultimately as a way to build society and have children. Now again, please hear me. I'm not saying traditional culture, let's get back to it. There are pros and cons to both of these things, but as we see both of these things, I hope you can begin to see in your own heart, whoa, what's normal for me hasn't historically been normal forever. Like most of human history is operated in a different context. The world in this age is different today than it's historically been. And this is where we need Jesus desperately. If historic tradition, culture, says, I discover my true self by looking outside me to my friends, my family, my religion, and I conform to that. And then our current culture says to find my true self, I look inside of me, and then I conform to that. Jesus says you discover your true self by looking up to him. And then you conform into his image. Not culture's image, not your internal desires image, but his. You don't look out, you don't look in, you look up to see Jesus. He gives you your identity. He's the one, when we are reading Atomic Habits, when it says, choose your identity. As a Christian, I just get to go, thank you, Jesus. Thank you that I don't have to choose my identity. Thank you that you have called me a beloved child of the King. Thank you that I have been made holy. I've been given your righteousness, that you see me as blameless, that I'm a partner of reconciliation in this world. I get to receive an identity from Jesus. And as I was talking to Stephen Johns this week about this, he said, man, this is so helpful because it also destroys both legalism and licentiousness. It was spot on. I was like, yes. Traditional culture generally has that legalistic framework. Okay, I need to figure out who I am. Okay, I've got to look to the outside world, and now I just conform to that. Whether I feel like it or not, I just have to become this thing. I have to work for it. Individualistic culture, we struggle with licentiousness. You do you. There is no framework for anyone getting in the way. You do whatever you want to do. The gospel contradicts both legalism and licentiousness. Jesus challenges legalism by saying, you don't have to work for your identity. You have been given an identity. And he challenges licentiousness. He doesn't just say, here's a free identity, go and have fun. He says, here is your identity. Now use this identity to become the type of person I've called you to be. Become who you are. You are a child of God, now act like it. Ephesians 5. Imitate your Father, the loving Father. Become like him because you've already been adopted. You're not working for your adoption. He's adopted you through the finished work of Jesus. He loves you perfectly right now as much as he can. You're in the family. Now act like the family. We receive our identity from him. We live out our identity. Now, here's the challenge. As we look at traditional culture and we look at our current culture of expressive individualism, while the pros and cons to both, and I'm not trying to advocate, let's get back to the good old days at all, I genuinely believe it was a bit easier to follow Jesus in a traditional culture than it is in our current culture. Here's why. Current culture, expressive individualism says, discover your true self and follow your heart. Jesus says, die to yourself and follow me. Those are different worlds. At least in the traditional culture, you had someone outside you saying, here's what you need to do. In our current culture, it's like, what's going on in here? Be true to yourself. We are prone and normalized to no one tells me what to do. And then Jesus shows up and says, I tell you what to do. And we're like, whoa, that's offensive. Those words are violent. And Jesus goes, these words are for your good. Look with me real quick at Matthew 16. This is after Jesus tells his disciples that he's going to die. The third time. He keeps telling them, this is the plan. Matthew 16, verse 23. That's a weird verse I gave you. Yeah, we could start in 21, but that's fine. Verse 23. Jesus turned and told Peter. So Peter says, no, that's not going to happen. Jesus turned and told Peter, get behind me, Satan. You're a hindrance to me because you're not thinking about God's concerns, but human concerns. A different type of worldliness. Peter's like, Jesus, you don't understand how the worldly Messiah works. The worldly Messiah comes in on a war horse and destroys the enemy physically and violently. You can't die. That's not how the world works. Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. My way is different than the world. And then he says, then Jesus says to his disciples, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life because of me will find it. For what will it benefit someone if he gains the whole world yet loses his life? Or what will anyone give in exchange for his life? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will reward each according to what he has done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Those words can't be more opposed to expressive individualism in our culture. Deny yourself. When you look in, but you don't look in to express, you look in to deny. Now, as God created each of us in his image uniquely with a beautiful Enneagram, he has. He's not looking for uniformity, robots. He's made us each individually. Praise him for it. But many of us, all of us, if we can say, take that a little too far. It's why the Enneagram becomes problematic. Oh, I'm a 3. Well, no, you're a child of God first, and the good side of the 3, use for the glory of Jesus. The bad side of the 3, crucify it. Deny it. Put it to death. I don't get to be like, just acting like a 3 again. Jesus goes, no. We deny ourselves. We take up our cross. Have you seen that on a billboard? Is anyone advertising anything like that? No. It's offensive. It's not comfortable. It doesn't feel like my truth. Follow him, not you. This is hard. And yet Jesus says, do you want to save your life? This is how you do it. He doesn't just say, guys, this is what's right. It's miserable. It's awful. It's hard. I wish I wired the world differently, but this is it. Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. You're going to hate it. He says, do this for your joy. Do this for your freedom. And this is where all we have to do is step back for a moment and look at the fruit of our culture. Anxiety, depression, suicide, loneliness, divorce. These numbers keep increasing in a world that says, keep doing you. It's like, when do we go, this isn't working really well? Like Jesus says, do it this way. And as we do it his way, we experience freedom, we experience life. He's not calling us to an awful life. He's calling us into freedom. But so many of us, we've bought into this lie that I need to look inside, find these truths, and then express them externally. So here's what let me do some application for a few. If this is where we're at, and this is one of the Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self with Carl Trueman. Phenomenal book. It's 400 pages. He ended up writing a shorter book called A Strange New World, where it's like condensed. They're both good. one of the discouraging things of the book was like there was no application. He just kind of like shows you the world's a mess. And you're like, yikes. Like, let's run for the mountains, right? Like, let's just stay here forever. Well, it doesn't work because sin is in here. You'll hear that about the flesh very soon. But I want to apply as best I can to just kind of go, okay, so if this is the air we breathe, most of us, what do we do about it? So if expressive individualism is all about the individual, we must practice deep relationships. Expressive individualism is just about you. You're an isolated being. Everything revolves around you. No wonder we're lonelier than we've ever been. Well, I've got Instagram though. Yeah, good luck. At least in traditional culture, you had people. You might not have liked them, but you had to, just what you did. You weren't lonely. Our loneliness, it's devastating. I preached on loneliness one time, and I had a grown man come up to me, married with kids, in his 50s, 60s, come up to me, weeping, hug me, and just go, I'm so lonely. I never realized it until we talked about it. I'm married, kids, life, I'm just lonely. Yeah, because we've bought into this expressive individualism. So if this is the world we're living in, the air we breathe, what does it look like to practice deep relationships? Now, by God's grace, that shouldn't be too new of a term for many of us. We believe the church is a family, right? But even the way we view family, oh, I'm a brother or a sister individually. No, we're actually a family where we're called to do life together. We're called to be a family where we have harder conversations with each other, where we confront each other on sin, something that does not happen in the world. You can't call somebody out. You can cancel them, of course, but you can't lovingly, relationally come to someone and go, I see something in your life that I'm worried about. Because, what do you mean? I'm being me. But in the family of God, it's different. It is essential that we fight against this individualism and fight for deep friendships. We fight for deep relationships. It is possible for you to be in a gospel community for 7 years and still not have friendships. We put these structures in place, but it's on you to seek out deep friendships. And can we be honest? Making friends as an adult is really awkward. It's hard. Feels weird. Hey, are you a little lonely too? I mean, I'm not, but I'm looking around, just seeing if I heard. Like it's hard, but we desperately need this. Jesus shows up on earth, from heaven to earth. If anyone could have just been an isolated individual, Jesus. And he had best friends. We're preaching through John right now. John in the upper room is resting on his chest. You have friends like that. I mean, resting on him, so close to him that when he says, one of you is going to betray me, Peter's like, John, ask him, who's it going to be? John's like, Jesus, who's it going to be? Like, there's this deep intimacy. We have to have relationships where we can call each other out. We all have blind spots. None of us sees clearly. Recently, I was talking with a guy, newer Christian, and he shared some of the struggles, sleeping with his girlfriend and all this kind of stuff. It had been happening for a while, and it seemed like it was just an ongoing pattern, and we were talking, and he kept using the phrase, dude, but we love Jesus. Like, I know we're struggling with some stuff, but we love Jesus. And I just lovingly, as graciously as I could, said, okay, dude, I've been in John, as you know, in the last 3 weeks, Jesus continually repeats, if you love me, you will obey my commands. So would you just help me understand when you keep saying, we love Jesus so much, and yet you're telling me also that you're walking in complete disobedience to his commands. You're not trying to seek change. Help me understand, are you wrong? Is Jesus wrong? Like what's going on here? And by the Spirit's grace, he just was like, whoa. Yeah, I'm wrong. Jesus is right. Yeah, I don't know what it means that I'm like, I love Jesus if I'm walking in complete disobedience to his commands. That doesn't make sense. Gets up, gives me a big hug. It's like, thank you. I was like, I wish the world could just see that. I'm not like, shame on you, bad, out. It's like, hey dude, I love you. What's going on? He's like, yeah, you're right. Man, boom, change. That, it's like, welcome to Christianity. This is what life should be like. But in an expressive individualistic culture, you can't call anyone out on anything. So we must practice deep friendships, deep relationships. Yuval Noah Harari, atheist historian, in his book Homo Deus, he says, humanism, which is basically another way of saying expressive individualism, humanism has taught us that something can be bad only if it causes somebody to feel bad. Many of us believe that. It's like, I don't want to make him feel bad because that's bad. No, I want him to walk in freedom and joy. I want to love him. And I need brothers and sisters to love me, that see things in my life and go, Brad, it might make Brad feel bad. That's okay. We're not called to just making everyone feel good all the time. We're called to love each other for their ultimate good. If expressive individualism is all about the need to express one's authentic self, we must practice a humble and quiet life that glorifies God. The world we're living in is so loud. It's about expressing the authentic true self. I've got to just tell everyone about who I am, stand on the mountaintop. I don't care what you think about me. I just have to tell you. This is why social media is addicting for an expressive individualist culture. I'm convinced a traditional culture back in the day would have a hard time. Like, what do I do on Instagram? It's like, just post a picture of your face and tell them your deep desires. Like, this is really easy. They'd be like, what? Like, can I post a picture of a mountain? No. Like, it's got to be of you, sharing everything personal. What does it look like for us to live quiet and godly lives? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Did I give you that verse? We got it, we're in a hurry, but look it up. Paul tells the Thessalonians, live a quiet and godly life. Live a quiet and godly, like, is that anyone's mission statement? Like Brad Sarian, living a quiet and godly life. So I need to be loud, I need to change the world. Paul's like, relax, be quiet. You have all these desires, chill. We need to be putting practices in our life to be quiet, to live a godly life. You don't always have to express everything you feel. Somebody says something on Facebook, you don't have to respond. Somebody says something, you could just chill. I heard a story of Dallas Willard one time. He's teaching at USC, philosophy professor, brilliant. Andy mentioned him. He had a friend who was with him, and he was in a philosophy class. And this student, Dallas Willard is like one of the most brilliant dudes ever. And this freshman philosophy kid's trying to like disprove Dallas Willard with something. And he gives like just a zinger towards the end of class. Just like mocking and humiliating Willard. And Willard goes, all right, class is dismissed. See y'all tomorrow. And the class ends and his buddy comes up and goes, what? Dude, you could have destroyed that kid. I know exactly what you wrote in your book. If somebody says this, you say this. Why didn't you do that? He's like, oh, I'm just practicing not having the last word. Anyone ever do that? Practicing not having the last word. Your spouse just has a dagger and you're like, I love you, good night. I can live a quiet and godly life. No, I need to express myself. No, you can calm down. You don't always have to. In an individualistic world, it says that ultimately the path of least resistance is good. We need to be people of self-control. And there is nothing the world says you can't do apart from consent. I think that's basically the level of morality we're at right now. As long as consent is somewhere, anywhere, you do you. This is a problem in all of us. Are we practicing self-control? Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. This is something the Spirit of God produces in us. We live in a world of excess and abundance. Sarah's parents took us on a Disney cruise this past summer. It was epic. Like if your in-laws ever want to take you on a Disney cruise, say yes. And yet at the same time, it was weird. I mean, the level of excess, waste, noise, and chaos. And everyone just exists for you. Every single person that's working in the Disney gear, you just walk by them in the hallway, they're like, is there anything I can get you? And day one, you're like, whoa, no, how are you doing? Day 6, you're like, more towels, please. It's dangerous. And we live in a culture like that. It's like, hey, just you, anything, go. You're sitting at a party. This happens all the time, right? It's like, oh, should I get another brownie? Everyone's like, yeah, do it. Get another one. It's like, who's the person like, I don't know, man. I don't think you should. It's like, there's no constraints. Like, we don't want to be the bad guy. We don't ever want to say, stop. Just go, green lights. Matthew McConaughey, man. Like, just give it more. Like this is the world we're living in. What does it look like to live a countercultural life of self-control? A life of fasting. A life of silence and solitude. One of the most important disciplines in my entire life over the past 7 years is every single month I take one day out of my schedule and I go away for 8 hours, silence, solitude with Jesus. My friends, I'm privileged to have friends who have a little pool house. They live right next to a cemetery. I go to a cemetery for 2 hours on those days. I hang out with dead people. Silence, me, Jesus, fasting, no email, no texting, nothing. And it's those days that realign my soul around Jesus. But when we're just going and going and going and going, we don't even see the chaos of it all. Like going to a cemetery every single month and being reminded, this is my end. Not my end, but my end. One day, someone's going to be walking on my tombstone. It puts things in perspective. When I'm fasting, what am I doing? I'm teaching my body, you're not in control. He's like, yes, I am, feed me. It's like growling all day long. I'm going, I'm self-control. I control you. You don't control me. We want to practice these things in the little things so we can practice them in the big things. We've put our flesh to death constantly. And the last thing, I'll finish here. We live in a world that is demanding us to agree with them. So we must be ready for persecution. If you have not already experienced it, it's coming. More and more. I'm not talking about death necessarily yet. But our culture is wildly hostile to the biblical teachings of sex and gender. More than anything else out there. I lost a close friend 3 years ago around this issue. We had been talking about Jesus for a while. He had been potentially considering Jesus. We'd go on hikes. We'd spend a lot of time together, really enjoyed our friendship. And one night he and his wife came over just to hang with us. We started talking and they started asking about gender and sex, LGBTQ, and where we stand. I was like, man, here's where I stand because of Jesus. Here's where I stand because of the Bible. I know it's confusing. I know you don't agree with it. I know the church has done some awful stuff in the past. I'm not for those things, but I'm faithfully following Jesus. He looks at me and says, you are dangerous. You are hurting people, and we can't be friends. It was the last time we ever hung out. It was devastating. It was the first time I'd ever actually experienced some of the stuff the New Testament talks about, that you will be hated by the world. Traditional culture, you weren't that hated. I read stories of pastors back in the day that were like celebrated. I'm like, I was born in the wrong day. I tell someone I'm a pastor and they're like, oh. We are hated. We are going to be hated. This isn't new. Jesus says, blessed are those who are persecuted, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Be glad and rejoice, because your reward is great in heaven, for this is how they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Be glad and rejoice when they persecute you. This is not a victim mentality, guys. They're going to come after us. Oh no, what do we do? It is a promise that they hated our King. They crucified him. They will hate us as well as we follow him faithfully. Are we ready? Are we ready? The good news is Jesus says, I have overcome the world. Here's my peace. My peace is that I have overcome the world. Will we take heart that he loves the world? He rejected worldliness. He died for the world, and one day he is making a new world. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for your kindness. Lord, would we not be conformed to this age, but be transformed into your image, Jesus. As we look inside, as we look outside, Jesus, I pray you'd keep lifting our eyes, that we would look up to you. That we discover the true self that you've called us into, that you've graciously given to us free of charge, cost you everything. And now would we walk in the freedom and joy of denying ourselves, of walking with you. Lord, anything that you opened our eyes to in these last way longer than I should have gone, would you let us do something with it? Would we not just go, oh, that's interesting? Would we go, Jesus, show me what I need to do about it? I want to conform my mind, my soul, my body around you, Jesus Christ. That I've been adopted so that I could be conformed into your image. It's my purpose, it's our purpose. And it's in that we find freedom and joy, and you receive the glory. We love you, praise you, in your beautiful name. Amen.